been about 8 years since we moved into this apartment, and that window crank hasn't worked once. It won't turn all the way and open the window. There's only one air conditioner, and it's in the living room. But we don't use it much because it's not very good. We usually don't need it, but when a heat wave settles upon Los Angeles, then we got to keep all the windows open at night to reel in the cool air rolling east off the Pacific. But that broken window is in my daughter's bedroom, so when it's hot out, there's not much to do about it. Her ceiling fan just pushes around the air, and the air conditioner doesn't reach our bedrooms, so it stays hot in her room. Now, that makes it sound more torturous than it really is. I mean, it gets sweaty in there, but she sleeps fine. I'm only bringing it up because of why I let it stay broken. It was worth it to lie to my wife about trying to get the maintenance guys to fix it. I didn't want it fixed, and never gave the reason why a second thought. Well, until I came across this story about Smog. Did you know that Smog just showed up one day in Los Angeles on July 8th, 1943, like an uninvited guest or a stranded hitchhiker? It was just a random Thursday morning during a hot stretch of days. It was too late by the time everyone got up. By dawn, the whole downtown area was fogged in and visibility was cut to just a few city blocks. Everyone who encountered the fumes were crying, coughing, sneezing, wondering who was doing this to them. And that's what bothered me, how dumbfounded they were. I mean, what caused that gas attack? It's not a mystery to us, but it was a mystery to them. Now, all the way back to 1542, this area has had a reputation for haze. That's when the explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed into what's now San Pedro and saw smoke darkening the skies because the local tribes were doing controlled burns in the autumn air. And in his diary, he called the place Bahia de las Fumas, the Bay of Smokes. So, the Los Angeles area has been hazy, at least occasionally, ever since it's been inhabited. But this attack was something new. This was the first time that perfect weather conditions combined with just enough emissions from just enough cars and trucks on the road, and the whole mix got baked dry over the valleys and then trapped in the bottleneck created by the mountains to the north, east, and south. The summer sun cooked up an ozone soup that suddenly gushed into view, ready to be consumed. The blue skies of California were once seen as a bulletproof birthright by the 19th century land barons who owned huge chunks of the coast. The daughter of one of those land barons, Kate Den Bell, called together her whole family in 1920 to celebrate her 76th birthday. The party was a 2-week campout on the dunes above the ocean at the mouth of the canyon she inherited, near modern-day Goleta. So on the final day of the festivities, the actual day of Kate's birthday, she's holding court and motioned for her gathered clan to notice a small prickly pear cactus clinging to the dunes. It was the only cactus nearby, and she said, "If you drill an oil well where that cactus grows, you will strike a gusher. Mark my words well, for it will make you rich one day." Kate died 6 years after that prophetic birthday speech, and her parcel of paradise was divided up by her children. Kate's daughter Carolyn inherited the canyon and dunes surrounding Kate's cactus. Now, Carolyn must have recalled that prophecy in 1928 when a young geologist named Frank Morgan sought a lease to drill for oil on her land. Financed by 2 oil companies, a well was drilled literally right next to Kate's patch of prickly pear cactus, and they drilled deeper than anyone in the area had done before, going down nearly 3,000 feet until they hit the motherlode. The oil well was called the Luton Bell Number 1, and it was such a massive gusher that it drew everyone else into the territory, revealing the immense deposits of oil underneath the Santa Barbara Channel. But as more and more equipment flooded onto Caroline's land, her husband noticed the trucks and tractors were getting too close to his mother-in-law's prickly pear cactus. So he had a welded iron fence built around it to protect it. Kate could see the future. She knew oil was there, but she couldn't see the consequences of pulling it out of the ground. Her view was colored by that bulletproof perfection she treated as a birthright. I mean, her California couldn't be damaged by a little smoke, right? Well, the world knows the rest of the story because Los Angeles is now synonymous with smog. And that's why I wanted my daughter's window to stay broken. If it could never be opened, then smog would have trouble sliding in and mixing with her breathing while she was sleeping, that broken crank acting as a bulwark. But that kind of reasoning evaporates under the heat of examination. What about the open window in our bedroom next door? The air spreads through the whole apartment. It doesn't make sense. But as a parent, I don't care. You make a constant string of decisions based on some protective instinct that could be the totally wrong thing to do, but a new string of decisions arrives before the old ones can be examined. Maybe it was another Jap attack, they asked each other. The first few morning hours of July 8th were disorienting to those who happened to be downtown. No one able to explain the dense fumes hugging the ground. And the first street corner suspects were the Japanese.
But if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first know him.
A Japanese submarine under the command of Kozo Nishino surfaced off the shore of the Barnsdall oil lease. It was a mile offshore. I could see it very clearly. It was so big I thought it might be a destroyer or cruiser. There were a couple of horses in the pasture near where I watched the shelling. They went mad. Shells were exploding and the horses screamed and raced about. The Japanese gunners soon realized they were missing their marks, so raised their guns, and now the shells went whizzing over the cliffs and incidentally over our heads. After the first few shots, the sub began to move north, firing all the time. And the shell craters were so spaced, it looked almost as if a giant had walked along the cliffs. Well, by that time, the army had taken over, and the blackout signals had wailed their warnings, and the coast was in complete darkness. The president's speech was over. In fact, the radio stations were silent.
By order of the Coast Interceptor Command, this station will now leave the air. Put out your lights. This station will now leave the air.
We all felt sort of tired after the excitement, so we went inside where the only light came from the flame under the coffee urn. We sat and just talked about what had happened and what might have happened. There were over a dozen shells fired towards the oil wells, and Kozo didn't hit a damn thing, except he blew a wooden pier to bits. He missed the giant storage tanks that would have made terrifying explosions. Maybe he wasn't aiming for the tanks. Maybe he was aiming at something harder to hit. Local legend claims the attack was an act of revenge. You see, As a captain aboard Japanese oil tankers in the 1930s, Kozo made numerous trips to this exact oil field. During one visit in the late 30s, Kozo was invited by the oil company to be honored in a ceremony for visiting officers. While making his way along the dunes with his crew and the American delegates, he somehow managed to fall over the welded iron fence, landing tail over tea kettle into Kate's cactus. The American hosts were as embarrassed as the Japanese guests, but a trio of nearby oil riggers thought it was fucking hilarious. And they were laughing loudly at the spectacle of an officer getting cactus spines pulled from his backside. That mocking laughter must have stung because Kozo left the ceremony in a polite but grim mood. And after the submarine attack, Kozo radioed his supervisors that Santa Barbara was left in a seething mass of flames, with wild panic visible on shore. There's a postcard from that era that shows his version of events, and on Radio Tokyo, the Japanese military called it a devastating attack on the mainland. But within months, he was relieved of his command, and he sinks with the undertow of history and disappears from view. And Goleta residents were not as devastated as Kozo claimed, but they were scared. The next morning's headlines announcing the submarine attacks just increased the paranoid groundswell of calls to intern anyone of Japanese descent living in California. More than a year after the impotent submarine attack, the headlines show that residents were still grappling with their fears about this new enemy, Japan. One of the top stories was news of a special prison camp we were building that would hold captive any Japanese citizen who refused to take a loyalty oath to the United States. Right below that headline, there's an update on the city's final plans to construct a network of 13 freeways across the city. So, on the morning of Los Angeles' first smog attack, residents were told that a 30-year plan had been finalized to bring them all easy freeway access for all their cars and trucks. Pitched as an aid to the war effort and a solution to unemployment, there's no mention of the environmental impact this might have. The map from the article shows more freeways than ever really got built, but the ones we have now are all on there. The big ones we call the 10, the 101, and the 405. They form a ring around my neighborhood. It's harder to be more central and yet farther away from a freeway on-ramp than my apartment near the Sunset Strip. And I had told myself that being farther away from the freeways was better for my family, less pollution, as if the amount of difference in exposure was enough to actually matter. But it doesn't, does it? There's not less danger with a broken window as a bulwark and a ring of freeways as a private moat. So I told my landlord to fix the window. A few Japanese Americans had predicted that submarine attack, even predicting it would coincide with the president's fireside chat. They also said that Los Angeles would be attacked the next night. What happened instead became known as the Battle of Los Angeles. Less than 48 hours after Kozo stumbled through the Santa Barbara Channel, word of an impending attack swept all the radio stations off the air again and ushered in another blackout order for the entire area. The 4th Interceptor Command reported something strange over the coast. Searchlights swept the sky, sirens wailed, and a slow-moving object was seen by some. In the intensity of the bright patch where a score of searchlights converged high in the air, the first spotlight beams had barely joined before anti-aircraft batteries exploded shells against the night sky. The huge guns were targeting that bright focal point of converged beams, joined together like fingers on a Ouija board directing a planchette. The reports varied widely. Shrapnel bursting over and over like 4th of July fireworks awoke the entire city. People wandered out in their pajamas, streets dark from the blackout, and they stared at the sky, watching the first 20-minute barrage. Some spectators swore they saw planes. Some called it a cloud-like formation. But observers with binoculars were unable to see anything but smoke and sky. Blanche Sedgwick was staying in someone else's house in a rear guest bedroom, and she stepped outside onto the porch in her sleep clothes to see what was happening, just like everyone else, and saw the flashes and heard the loud explosions. But high above her, an unexploded 3-inch anti-aircraft shell whistled down towards the concrete driveway of the house, tagging a telephone wire on the way down and exploding, shattering windows, and fragments of the projectile tore through the garage, and one large shell fragment pierced the rear wall and tore through Blanche's mattress and blanket, which must have still been warm from her body. I don't know where she slept the rest of the night. Maybe she didn't, but by 7:21 a.m., the all-clear signal was given, triggering the worst traffic jam in the city's history, as all the idle cars were free to move again in the daylight sun. After an hour or so, the attack of fumes on this random Thursday morning was obviously not a Japanese plot. People were coughing. They weren't dying. Even the most paranoid then had to wonder, who was to blame? The question gets deferred, though, because the fumes dissipate and blue sky returns.
No one here is underestimating the magnitude of the task confronting the American, Canadian, and British troops.
A headline about the fumes appeared soon after on a front page consumed by the news of the Allied attack on Sicily. The strange fumes were treated as a nuisance, and blue sky amnesia sets in.
They're attempting something that has never been done before. Our command of the air is complete.
Relief was temporary. All through the summer, new attacks rolled in and just as quickly rolled out. Superior Judge Roy V. Rhodes, who was assigned to a City Hall Tower courtroom, said the fumes were so bad he refused to conduct sessions until relief was gained. Mayor Bowron promised to solve the issue in 4 months, and he opened a grand jury investigation to get to the bottom of this great mystery. After much deliberating and testing, the culprit was determined. There was a butadiene plant on Aliso near the Los Angeles River, just east of downtown. It was run by the Southern California Gas Company, but had been pumping out black rubber for the war effort. The thick, greasy fumes from the smokestacks became the prime suspect. Shutting it down was hard, though, because the military needed it. But that's how badly the mayor wanted to solve this problem. They finally shut it down. And of course, the smog came right back. On the top floors of City Hall, there are no longer any courtroom sessions. But in one of those hallways, a portrait of every Los Angeles mayor graces the walls. And the portrait of Mayor Bowron looks out a window, staring at the distant mountains, his gaze stuck, searching the horizon for the culprit. All the smog days ran together, and 72 years later, it's still not fixed. Like my window. After I told my landlord that the window was busted, 2 guys came to look at it. They made a note, they took a picture, and then nothing. They won't get back to me on it. So the window is still broken, but at least now I want it fixed.
So there's the story, folks, and I'm proud to be a part of it, even if only as a tiny atom inside modern gasoline.
No, I'm doing nicely with this one, thanks.
Go ahead. What is your message?